ExamPrep.School. Maine-personal-lines-insurance exam, exam code 12-ME-55. There are 4 practice exams in this series. This video covers Practice Exam 1. The first 20 questions are free. In this video, we will be covering the following major categories for Practice Exam 1. Maine laws and rules. Common to property, casualty, and personal lines. Maine laws and rules. Pertinent to personal lines insurance. Property and casualty insurance terms and related concepts. Property and casualty policy provisions in contract law. Types of casualty policies. Types of property policies. Let's walk through the format. I'll read each question and its choices. Let's get started. Question 1. Under a standard H03 homeowners policy, Coverage A and Coverage C provide protection for different types of property. Which of the following best describes the difference between Coverage A and Coverage C? A. Coverage A insures personal property worldwide. Coverage C insures structures on premises only. B. Coverage A insures the dwelling and attached structures on a named perils basis. Coverage C insures personal property on an open perils basis. C. Coverage A insures liability claims against the insured. Coverage C insures medical payments to others. D. Coverage A insures the dwelling and other structures on an open perils basis. Coverage C insures personal property on a named perils basis. A countdown circle appears in the top right. Once it completes, the answer is revealed. You can pause at any time if you'd like longer to think. If you'd like additional practice covering more topics, see the description for our book. The correct answer is D. The correct answer is that Coverage A covers the dwelling and other structures on an open perils basis, while Coverage C extends named perils coverage to personal property. Reason A is not correct. This reverses the coverages, since personal property is Coverage C and structures are Coverage A. Reason B is not correct. This incorrectly states Coverage A is on a named perils basis and personal property on an open perils basis. Reason C is not correct. Coverage A and Coverage C are property coverages, not liability or medical payments. Question 2. Which of the following statements accurately characterizes the scope of Coverage A under an H03 homeowners policy? A. It provides named perils coverage for the dwelling. B. It offers liability protection for third-party bodily injury. C. It insures personal property worldwide. D. It covers the dwelling on an open perils basis but excludes losses from earth movement. The correct answer is D. Coverage A under an H03 insures the dwelling on an open perils basis, subject to standard exclusions such as earth movement. Reason A is not correct. Coverage A is open perils, not named perils. Reason B is not correct. Liability protection is separate liability coverage, not Coverage A. Reason C is not correct. Personal property coverage is under Coverage C, not Coverage A. Question 3. Under an H04 renter's policy, Coverage C for personal property typically includes off-premises losses up to what percentage of the Coverage C limit? A. 10%. B. 25%. C. 50%. D. 100%. The correct answer is A. H04 provides Coverage C for personal property on a named perils basis and generally extends off-premises coverage up to 10% of the Coverage C limit. Reason B is not correct. A 25% off-premises limit is not standard for H04 personal property. Reason C is not correct. 50% would greatly exceed the typical off-premises limit under H04. Reason D is not correct. Full coverage off-premises equals 100% is not provided under an H04. Question 4. A grease fire in the kitchen destroyed custom-built cabinets that the insured installed in a condominium. Under an H06 policy, which coverage part applies to reimburse the loss of these built-in improvements? A. Coverage B, personal property. B. Coverage C. Loss of use. C. Coverage A. Improvements and betterments. D. Coverage D. Personal liability. The correct answer is C. Coverage A under an HO. 6 policy ensures the unit owner's interest in improvements and betterments, including built-in cabinets, whereas other coverage parts apply to personal property, additional living expenses, and liability. Reason A is not correct. Personal property coverage applies to movable items, not permanently attached improvements in the unit. Reason B is not correct. Loss of use coverage takes care of additional living expenses, not replacement of structural improvements. Reason D is not correct. Personal liability coverage addresses third-party injury or damage claims, not damage to the insured's own property. Question 5. Under the dwelling property. 1. DP1. Basic form. Which peril is covered? A. Volcanic eruption. B. Windstorm. C. Water damage. D. Internal explosion. The correct answer is D. The DP1 basic form insures against only fire, lightning, and internal explosion. Reason A is not correct. Volcanic eruption is not a named peril under the DP1 basic form. Reason B is not correct. Windstorm is excluded under DP1 and covered only if specifically endorsed. Reason C is not correct. Water damage is not covered under DP1, except when resulting from internal explosion. Question 6. Under the dwelling property. 2. DP2. Broad form, which peril is included that is not covered by the DP1 basic form? A. Lightning strike. B. Collapse of building. C. Hail damage. D. Volcanic eruption. The correct answer is B. The DP2 broad form adds coverage for building collapse among other perils beyond those in DP1. Reason A is not correct. Lightning strike is already covered under the DP1 basic form. Reason C is not correct. Hail damage is not added under DP2 and remains excluded. Reason D is not correct. Volcanic eruption is not covered in either DP1 or DP2 forms. Question 7. A landlord purchases a DP3 special form policy on a rental dwelling. After a heavy winter storm, ice accumulation on a flat roof porch causes the porch to suddenly collapse. Under the DP3 special form coverage for the dwelling, how is this loss treated? A. Requires a collapse endorsement to extend coverage to damage from weight of ice. B. Automatically covered as an open peril collapse loss under the DP3 special form. C. Excluded because the porch is considered an unattached structure. D. Excluded under the earth movement exclusion in the DP3 policy. The correct answer is B. The DP3 policy insures a dwelling on an open perils basis and includes collapse coverage for sudden structural failure due to weight of ice without any additional endorsement. Reason A is not correct. This is incorrect because the DP3 collapse provision already includes collapse from weight of ice without needing an endorsement. Reason C is not correct. This is incorrect because a porch attached to the dwelling is covered under the dwelling definition and not treated as an unattached structure. Reason D is not correct. This is incorrect because collapse from ice weight is not an earth movement event and is covered under the collapse provision. Question 8. Under the National Flood Insurance Program, MYFIP, which statement best describes the relationship between building property coverage and contents coverage for single-family residences? A. Building property coverage insures structural components and permanently installed fixtures, while contents coverage separately insures personal belongings under a distinct form and limit. B. Building property coverage applies only to the foundation, with fixtures and personal property both covered under the contents form. C. Contents coverage automatically extends to cover damage to structural components up to 100% of the contents coverage limit. D. Building property and contents are combined in a single policy form with one aggregate coverage limit. The correct answer is A. This option correctly states that the NFIP offers a building property form covering structural elements and permanently installed items, and a separate contents form for personal property, each with its own limit. Reason B is not correct. Structural coverage is broader than just the foundation and includes walls, floors, fixtures, and certain equipment, so it is not limited only to the foundation. Reason C is not correct. Contents coverage does not extend to structural components. It is strictly for personal property under its own limit. Reason D is not correct. The NFI issues separate forms for building property and contents rather than combining them under a single aggregate limit. Question 9. Which of the following losses would be excluded under the flood exclusion found in a standard homeowner's policy without a separate flood endorsement? A. Damage from the overflow of a normally dry creek onto the insured's land. B. Damage from sewage backup through a basement drain. C. Damage from water leaking through a failed plumbing joint. D. Damage caused by wind-driven rain entering through a roof opening. The correct answer is A. The standard homeowner's flood exclusion removes coverage for surface water overflow, tidal water rise, and similar flood events unless a separate flood endorsement is purchased. Reason B is not correct. Sewage backup is excluded by a separate sewer and drain endorsement, not by the flood exclusion. Reason C is not correct. Sudden plumbing leaks may be covered under the dwelling coverage if no exclusion applies. Reason D is not correct. Wind-driven rain is covered under the policy's wind coverage, not excluded by the flood exclusion. Question 10. A homeowner closed a mortgage loan on a property located in a special flood hazard area on June 5th and applied for an NFIP flood insurance policy the same day, submitting full premium payment. According to NFIP waiting period rules for lender-required policies, when does flood coverage become effective? A. 12:01 a.m. on July 5th, 30 days after application. B. 12:01 a.m. on June 6th, the day following application. C. 12:01 a.m. on June 5th, immediately upon payment. D. 12:01 a.m. on June 15th, 10 days after application. The correct answer is B. This option is correct because when flood insurance is required by a mortgage lender for a property in a special flood hazard area, the NFIP policy becomes effective at 12:01 a.m. on the day after the application and payment. Reason A is not correct. The 30-day waiting period applies only to policies not mandated by a lender at closing. Reason C is not correct. Coverage does not begin immediately upon payment for a lender-required policy. Reason D is not correct. NFIP rules do not include a 10-day waiting period for any policy. Question 11. Which coverage in a standard personal auto policy provides protection for damage you cause to another person's vehicle? A. Collision coverage. B. Bodily injury liability. C. Property damage liability. D. Comprehensive coverage. The correct answer is C. This option is correct because property damage liability specifically covers physical damage an insured causes to another person's property, such as their vehicle. Reason A is not correct. Collision coverage applies to repair of the insured's own vehicle when it crashes, not others' vehicles. Reason B is not correct. That coverage applies to injuries sustained by other parties, not property damage. Reason D is not correct. Comprehensive coverage handles non-collision perils for the insured's own vehicle, not liability for others' property. Question 12. Which term describes liability limits on an auto policy that specify separate maximum amounts per person and per accident? A. Combined single limit. B. Aggregate limit. C. Split limit. D. Per occurrence limit. The correct answer is C. This option is correct because split limits define distinct per person and per accident maximums, such as separate amounts for bodily injury per person and per accident. Reason A is not correct. A combined single limit provides one total maximum for all claims without separate per person or per accident amounts. Reason B is not correct. An aggregate limit caps total payable in the policy period, not separate per person and per accident amounts. Reason D is not correct. A per occurrence limit sets a maximum per accident but does not establish a separate per person limit. Question 13. Sarah Johnson's personal auto policy names her as the insured. Living in her household are her 17-year-old stepdaughter, Emily, and Tom, Emily's 18-year-old boyfriend, who occasionally stays overnight. Unbeknownst to Sarah, her neighbor Mike, who lives next door, took Sarah's covered auto without permission and caused a minor collision. Under the policy definitions, which individual is considered an insured while operating the covered auto? A. Mike Thompson, the neighbor who took the auto without permission. B. Tom Miller, Emily's 18-year-old boyfriend, who stays overnight occasionally. C. Emily Johnson, Sarah's 17-year-old stepdaughter who lives with her. D. Sarah's grandmother who resides in another state. The correct answer is C. The policy defines an insured as the named insured and resident relatives by blood, marriage, or adoption. The stepdaughter lives in the household and qualifies. Occasional visitors, unauthorized users, and non-resident relatives do not qualify. Reason A is not correct. Taking the vehicle without permission makes the neighbor an unauthorized user, which is excluded from coverage. Reason B is not correct. The boyfriend is neither related by blood nor marriage and thus is not a resident relative under the policy definitions. Reason D is not correct. A relative living in another state is not a resident of the household and therefore is not an insured. Question 14. Harriet Lopez gave permission to a contractor's employee, Tim, to drive her covered auto to pick up plumbing supplies for the contractor's business. While en route, Tim negligently strikes a cyclist, causing injury. Under the permissive use provisions of the personal auto policy, which coverage applies to Tim's liability for the cyclist's injuries? A. Excluded due to the policy's business use exclusion. B. Subject to excess coverage only with the contractor's auto policy primary. C. Excluded because Tim is not a resident relative. D. Covered as a permissive user under the liability section. The correct answer is A. Reason C is not correct. Fines or penalties are not part of property damage coverage and are typically excluded. Reason B is not correct. The contractor's policy would not be primary if the business use exclusion eliminates coverage. Reason C is not correct. Resident relative status is irrelevant because the business use exclusion overrides permissive use coverage. Reason D is not correct. Permissive user coverage does not apply when usage is for business and expressly excluded by the policy. Question 15. A Maine resident insured under a personal auto policy travels to Massachusetts for a week. While there, the insured causes an accident resulting in bodily injury. Massachusetts law requires higher minimum liability limits than Maine. According to the policy's out-of-state coverage provision, how is the insured's liability coverage determined? A. Massachusetts financial responsibility laws supersede the policy and eliminate coverage. B. Coverage remains at Maine limits unless a special endorsement is added. C. The policy automatically increases to satisfy Massachusetts minimum liability limits. D. The policy pays Maine limits for the first 30 days, then adjusts to state requirements. The correct answer is C. The out-of-state provision in a personal auto policy automatically provides the higher of the policy limits or the state's financial responsibility requirements when operating in another jurisdiction. Reason A is not correct. State laws do not eliminate coverage. They only set minimum limits which the policy will meet. Reason B is not correct. No endorsement is needed because the policy's out-of-state clause automatically adjusts limits. Reason D is not correct. There is no 30-day threshold. The higher limits apply immediately upon entry into the state. Question 16. Which of the following best describes the primary function of medical payments coverage in a standard personal auto policy, along with its typical per-person limit? A. Reimburses medical and funeral expenses, regardless of fault, up to $5,000 per person. B. Pays bodily injury liability claims of others up to $25,000 per person. C. Covers property damage to another vehicle up to $5,000 per accident. D. Provides wage replacement benefits up to $2,000 per week. The correct answer is A. This coverage reimburses medical and funeral expenses for insureds and passengers, irrespective of fault, and is commonly offered with limits around $5,000 per person. Reason B is not correct. This describes liability coverage limits rather than medical payments reimbursement. Reason C is not correct. Medical payments coverage does not pay for property damage. Reason D is not correct. Wage replacement is not provided under medical payments coverage. Question 17. Under the medical payments coverage of a standard personal auto policy, which injured party would be covered regardless of fault? A. A motorcycle passenger injured in a single vehicle crash. B. A pedestrian struck by the insured vehicle. C. A bicyclist struck by a non-insured driver. D. A bus passenger injured during a weekday commute. The correct answer is B. Medical payments coverage applies to medical expenses of anyone injured by the insured vehicle, including pedestrians struck by that vehicle, regardless of fault. Reason A is not correct. Coverage excludes injuries sustained on two-wheeled vehicles like motorcycles. Reason C is not correct. Medical payments does not extend to accidents caused by non-insured drivers hitting cyclists. Reason D is not correct. Injuries on public conveyances are not covered under auto medical payments. Question 18. During evening traffic, Alex is stopped at a red light when a vehicle suddenly collides with his car and immediately flees the scene. His bodily injuries exceed his medical payments limit. Under his uninsured motorist coverage, at what point does coverage legally trigger for his bodily injury claim? A. Only after Alex obtains a court judgment against the unidentified motorist. B. At the moment of the accident with the hit-and-run driver. C. Once the police confirm the fleeing vehicle's identity. D. After Alex recovers and submits a completed proof of loss. The correct answer is B. Uninsured motorist coverage is triggered at the time of the accident with an uninsured or hit-and-run vehicle, regardless of later legal proceedings or police identification. Reason A is not correct. Coverage does not require a court judgment. It attaches at the accident. Reason C is not correct. Police identification is not a condition precedent to triggering coverage. Reason D is not correct. Filing proof of loss is part of the claim process, not the trigger event. Question 19. Christine has underinsured motorist coverage with a $50,000 bodily injury limit. An at-fault driver's liability policy only covers $25,000, and Christine's total medical expenses are $40,000. How much will Christine's underinsured motorist coverage pay? A. $25,000. B. $50,000. C. $40,000. D. $15,000. The correct answer is D. Underinsured motorist coverage pays the difference between the insured's damages and the at-fault driver's liability limits, subject to the insured's policy limit. Here, $40,000 minus $25,000 equals $15,000. Reason A is not correct. Pays difference, not the at-fault driver's full liability limit. Reason B is not correct. Insurer will not pay up to its full limit unless damages exceed the sum of at-fault limits and UIM limit. Reason C is not correct. Underinsured coverage does not reimburse the entire medical expense if the at-fault limit partially applies. Question 20. Under a standard personal auto policy's Part D coverage for damage to your auto, which of the following losses would be paid under other than collision coverage rather than collision coverage? A. B. A rate filing is incomplete. B. Damage resulting from impact with a utility pole during a head-on crash. C. Harm to the vehicle when it collides with a guardrail after brake failure. D. Physical damage when the car strikes a deer in the roadway. The correct answer is D. This option is correct because other than collision coverage under Part D includes losses caused by contact with animals, a peril excluded from collision coverage. Reason A is not correct. Upset losses such as flipping are covered under collision coverage, not other than collision. Reason B is not correct. Impact with a utility pole in a head-on crash is a collision loss covered under collision coverage. Reason C is not correct. Losses resulting from mechanical failure leading to collision are covered by collision coverage. Enjoyed this practice test? Tap like, hit subscribe, and share it with a classmate. Got a question we should tweak? Comment below. We read them all. Find full practice exam books in the description or at ExamPrep.School.